All right, so now we have talked about Mendel's laws, we talked about non-Mendel genetics. So now I'm going to introduce sort of a picture diagram of genetics. And they are called pedigrees. Now, in this picture, you will see squares and circles. A square is a male and a circle is a female. If it's shaded in, it means that they're carrying the disease or they are showing that trait. Some of them will actually have them, if it's a carrier, in other words, if they're heterozygous, you might see this, carrier / heterozygous. You may see that some do it, some don't. All right, now, if a male and female have produced children together, you will see this line connecting them. Their children will be connected by a bracket, okay? So this indicates a mating relationship. This bracket indicates a sibling relationship. And so you might see one where this guy has a mating relationship with this girl has a mating relationship with this guy, but these two people are not in any way related because they're not in the brackets as being part of that sibling crew. So this is a pedigree, not of a disease, but of a trait, widow's peak or straight hair. Straight hair is recessive. So usually what they do with the recessive allele is they will shade that in. So straight hairline is going to have this shading. Widow's peak won't. Now, that means that we won't be able to tell if they're homozygous dominant or heterozygous dominant, but we kind of can tell, and I'll show you how in just a minute. All right, so you have Al and Beth. They have a mating relationship, and you can see that they've had 4 children. All right? Of these 4 children, 2 of them have straight hairlines. So what do we know then about Al and Beth? Well, we know that Al and Beth are carriers, which they don't shade in here, but we can, because otherwise their kids couldn't have straight hairlines. Okay, so they have to be big H, little h. All right. Now, we don't know what these kids are. We do know that they have a widow's peak. We know for a fact that these are little h, because they're shaded in. So then Henry marries Isabella. Now, Isabella is interesting as well because Isabella obviously has one dominant allele, but we don't know this other allele because her sister Julia is recessive and her dad is also recessive. We can assume her mom is heterozygote because that's the only way Julia could have gotten it. So we know it's a possibility she's a heterozygote, but we're not sure. So Henry and Isabel, they have a mating relationship and they have 2 children, Kristen and Libby. Kristen has the recessive hairline like this. Libby, we're not sure about her, but that also means that we know for a fact that Isabel and Henry are heterozygous, okay? So you can use this, even though this is showing genotype, if you work backwards, look at the kids, see the traits, you can often determine the genotypes of the parents, okay? So a parent with a widow's peak has a child with a straight, or has a straight hairline, must be big H, little h. Kristen has straight hair, but her parents do not, so straight hairline is the homozygous recessive. And Libby is either this, we're just not really sure, we don't know. Not all genotypes can be determined. So we figured out all of these people's genotypes except Libby. Well, and Evelyn. Since Evelyn and Libby haven't had any kids yet, we can't really determine their genotype. So they're going to be the ones left without a genotype written in. All right, now this is hemophilia. All right, now hemophilia is a little tricky. So hemophilia is sex-linked on the X chromosome. So a lot of times when something is sex-linked, they will show you carrier females, and that's what's happened here. So Queen Victoria has 2 X's, one of which has hemophilia. Albert only, of course, has 1 X, and he does not have hemophilia. Since they have a girl, this girl just happens to get that carrier chromosome from her mom, and of course, from her dad, she doesn't get a carrier. This girl is the same. She gets a carrier from her mom, Alice, and of course, a normal one from her dad, Louis. Now, we end up with a boy over here. So the boy gets a Y from his dad, but he inherits this hemophiliac from his mom, this recessive. So this is an example of X-linked recessive. Now, sometimes they're going to have you work backwards on a pedigree to try and determine what is happening. Like, is it recessive? Is it a dominant trait? Is it a recessive trait? Is it sex-linked on the X chromosome, sex-linked on the Y? Some tips. If it's sex-linked on the Y, all males will be affected. All right? If it's dominant, it will not ever skip a generation. It can't skip a generation. Okay, so the 2 most tricky are X-linked recessive and just regular recessive. Usually when it's sex-linked, they're going to show you who is a carrier and who isn't. So that can actually be an indicator of whether or not it's a sex-linked or not. Recessive can skip a generation, and you should have close to equal number of males and females. X-linked recessive will have more males than females, and females are a carrier. That's how you're going to know. So in this case, X-linked recessive, you have female carriers and more males affected. That's how you can kind of try and determine that. If they give you a disorder and they don't give you any more information about it than that. These are some autosomal disorders, so these are not sex-linked disorders. And so recessive albinism, cystic fibrosis, phenylketonuria, sickle cell Tay-Sachs, achondroplasia, Huntington's, hypercholesterolemia, those are dominant disorders, okay? So these are just some common disorders. So it helps sometimes if they give you a pedigree, say, of albinism that you already know that it's recessive. But sometimes when they're asking you to guess whether it's recessive or dominant, they're not going to tell you the disease, okay? So again, if the parents are carriers, sometimes that they will show you by just shading in half. That's basically all this says. Now, Huntington's disease is a dominant disorder. So neither Peter's mother nor older sister show any signs of Huntington's. So here's Peter's mother, and apparently she has a dad. Peter has a sister who doesn't have Huntington's, and then there's Peter over here. Now, it is a dominant disease, okay? It is a dominant disorder. His father died of Huntington's, okay? Now, since his sister does not have Huntington's, she would be little h, little h. Mom doesn't have Huntington's, little h, little h. Dad, because he has Huntington's, he could have a big H or a little h. We don't know. Okay. So dad, because he has Huntington's, has a big H. But because sister has 2 little h's, we know he's big H, little h. So let's do, all it is a monohybrid cross at this point. Mom is HH. Now, because it is dominant, this 50% is going to, he has a 50% chance of having Huntington's because of that big H. and a 50% chance of not having Huntington's disease. Okay?